Hi, my name is Rachel Saunders and welcome to this episode of the Temporal Hospitality podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit that bell and check out the link below for the script, which has got all the sources that I've used in this episode. On the evening of June 19th, 1953, Ethel Rosenberg sat in her cell at Sing Sing prison. The lights dimmed 3 times as her husband Julius received 3 electric shocks and was pronounced dead shortly after. Then, a warder unlocked her cell and a coterie of guards led her solemnly to the execution chamber. As she entered, old Sparky greeted her, along with the executioner, witnesses, who stared at her as she was strapped down to meet her fate. 3 shocks convulsed her body, though, following a doctor's examination, it was determined her heart still beat. 2 more shocks were delivered, her head smoking from the electricity, burnt alive for the treason she was convicted of. Her death marked the denouement of the A-bomb spy scandal, a hunt in which the main spies escaped a similar fate. Ethel was buried 2 days later, with a crowd of over 10,000 people gathered outside the cemetery. Witch hunts, executions, and persecution of women have deep historic roots, and how those women are framed is based on the narratives passed down over the centuries. To be a woman in the world where a man has power is to tread dangerously, especially when the punishment for perceived infractions can be death. Those who step outside of the lines are accused of literal and figurative witchcraft, facing the full power of society to crush any dissent to that power. Here, I explore how women have been crushed and punished over time for stepping over the line and pushing back against those in power. Philosophically, the persecution of women has been justified going back to Babylon. Women have been expected to veil, to keep the hearth, and to be the breeders for the next generation. Worse, they have long been legal chattel, possessions to be passed from father to husband to grave, kept infantilized at law. When a woman rebels against those strictures, she is forced to pay a toll, either be rejected from societal mores or be damned in the process. History has never been kind to women who rebel. This is not a matter of law, as law has built and kept the prison which binds women to strict rules of obedience. History is mostly written by men, as men were the ones educated in letters, and women's insights and opinions are conspicuously absent. The only signs we have are the women punished, the women figuratively and literally burnt for daring to stand up to the law. Conversely, how women frame themselves and the narratives they use to fight back is complicated, potentially contradictory. Sainthood and martyrdom are used to frame women who are perceived as virtuous, yet women such as Ethel Rosenberg, who are part of a large conspiracy, are only viewed through a single prism without texture or nuance. Mother Teresa's legacy in India is contested because on the one hand she is seen as a virtuous nun who dedicated her life to caring for the sick and dying, yet there is clear evidence from her hospices that she refused to use the vast amounts of money donated to alleviate the suffering or actually treat those who came into organisations' care because she believed that suffering was noble and virtuous. This is a complication of treating women as noble beings, as it is the nuances which provide the actual understanding of who she is. Philosophically, this invites us to see women not simply a body in the world, but as a complex individual with all the intersections that involves. By burning witches, heretics, and those who rebel against restrictive controls, society seeks to exercise itself of its disruptive women. Conversely, those women who seek to co-opt that narrative need to be scrutinised and examined lest they seek to distort those women who died or were exorcised from society. Pulling back the veil. The concept of veiling is both figurative and literal. Most societies at some point have expectations that women ought to dress in a certain manner, usually demure and chaste, with a dress code that denotes womanhood on visual inspection. Veiling in the literal sense includes hijabs, headscarves, and other forms of head coverings that are either compulsory or heavily encouraged. To be veiled is to be made a lesser being than the men who are not required to wear such a garment. Indeed, philosophically, the veil is the literal barrier between men and women, and to reject veiling is in principle to take on the masculine. A woman who rebels steps across the divide between the metaphorical veiling of women to seize the provenance of the masculine. To burn the witch is to force women back into figurative and literal veiling, to enforce it so that no woman would dare to cross that line again. For centuries, women across the Mediterranean wore veils of all kinds, particularly in the Greek world, but also in the ancient Near East and the Roman Empire. Compulsory veiling has long been seen as a sign of social morality, a public display of women's chastity. So, refusing to wear a veil or refusing to comply with strict dress codes has been a first outward sign of rebellion. Iran's compulsory veiling laws, which apply to girls as young as 7, violate a whole host of rights, including the right to equality, freedom of expression, religion and belief, privacy, equity and non-discrimination, personal and bodily autonomy. These laws also inflict severe pain and suffering amounting to torture of one form or another and of ill treatment. Mahsa Amini was beaten to death by Iranian morality police, sparking widespread protests across the country. In 2024, human rights defender Sharif Mohammadi and Kurdish civil rights society activist Pakshan Azizi were convicted of armed rebellion against the state and sentenced to death by revolutionary courts in separate cases, solely due to their peaceful activism against the Islamic Republic's oppressive treatment of women. Defending women's rights in Iran has led to a punitive crackdown on anyone seeking to push back. And in 2025, the authorities flogged a male singer 74 times for performing a protest song against Iran's discriminatory compulsory veiling laws. Bahram Saeedi was arrested from her family home in Sanandaj on 10th March 2025. She was previously detained during the Women Life Freedom Uprising of 2022 and released on bail after 2 months. Soma Mohammad-Razi was arrested at a workplace in Sanandaj on 10th of March. Security forces had previously summoned and threatened her on multiple occasions in relation to her women's rights activism. Sahalia Mortaji was arrested in Dangolan on the evening of 10th of March. She was previously briefly arrested in January 2025 for protesting death sentences against women prisoners. She was also detained during the Women Life Freedom Uprising and sentenced to 5 years in prison for charges including spreading propaganda against the system. Layla Pashay was arrested from a home in Sanandaj on the 10th of March 2025 after speaking against compulsory veiling, child marriage, violence against women and executions of women in Iran during events on International Women's Day. During the speech, she said, "Women in Iran are held captive by authorities who fear the power of women. The women's movement has passed the point of no return. Women worldwide, especially in the Middle East, will never be silenced again." On the 14th of December 2024, singer Parastu Ahmadi was detained after she live-streamed a concert in which she appeared unveiled in public in a shoulder-bearing dress. The video went viral, amassing 2.5 million views. She was released on bail several hours later. On the 13th of December 2024, Reza Khandan, a human rights defender, was arrested to serve an unjust prison sentence in relation to his campaigning against compulsory veilism. Reza Khandan, who is the husband of lawyer Nazrin Sotoudeh, was sentenced to 6 years in prison by a revolutionary court in January 2019. Compulsory veiling laws violate a whole host of rights, including the rights to equality, freedom of expression, religion and belief, private equity and non-discrimination, personal and bodily autonomy, and inflict severe pain and suffering amounting to torture and other ill treatment. After the American withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, the Taliban imposed a harsher form of Sharia law which imprisoned women in their own homes and infantilized under extreme male guardianship. Those women who had been caught in the Taliban's dragnet were not resisting or protesting, simply wanting to survive and earn money to live. As Radan lays out, the brutalising of women's bodies through whippings and stonings has enforced this rigid adherence to the new social order. In August 2024, the Taliban banned all women from speaking in public, shutting down radio stations and issuing orders that women's voices were to be confined to the home. Thus, the literal social veiling of women from the rest of Afghanistan is coming about. A central point of all veiling of women is the desire to control and force women to conform to social ideals, which bind them to a lesser status. The desire to control is deep-rooted and long-standing. Women born in Athens and Sparta were at a higher risk of infanticide because of their gender. As with modern cases of femicide and patriarchal control, families preferred to have at least one healthy son who could inherit their fortune and lands. Marriage was the root from which all control sprang, and any opposition to marriage and the transfer of property that signified has historically been treated with extreme prejudice. Modern conceptions of demure womanhood, tradwives, and other symbols of control drawn from the same well. Tradwife aesthetics uses a barefoot, long-skirted baby on the breast motif, which would be familiar to all across the ancient world. The veiling of modern women is done through the glamorous iconography of this traditional aesthetic, which in reality is actually symbolic of the hardships all women were forced to endure. The vacuum cleaner, dishwasher and microwave were invented in part so women's labour would be saved. You simply have to look at adverts from the 1930s, 40s and 50s to see who those products were aimed at, even if the person ultimately paying for them were men. To reveil women is therefore a retrograde act against which all women are fighting. It is not rebellious to hark back to the legal infantilization of women, nor does it make a woman a martyr to be counselled over her fight against women's rights. Phyllis Schafferly was pilloried for her crusade against women's liberation. Her professional career imploded because she refused to accept women deserved equal rights. Reveiling does not require a woman to put a piece of cloth over her head. It requires her first to accept that such an act is justified for the sake of her moral virtue. If you can get a woman to accept her own second-class citizenship without a fight, then coercion of force will be unnecessary. This education of moral codes is so pernicious because if you teach a girl from the moment she can read that she is a lesser citizen than her brother, father and every other male in society, that child will learn to accept it as fact. Rebellion and the yearning for freedom come because all people desire to be free, but first they have to conceive of what that freedom even looks like. Hence why pluralism is often viewed as a problem in conservative societies, because those societies fear what exposure can do to the minds of those they seek to control. In The Handmaid's Tale, all women are forbidden from reading precisely because the regime fears that a woman who can read will be the spark of rebellion. Iconoclasts and heretics. This then begs the question as to what society expects from women, and how it then treats women who are iconoclastic and heretical to societal impositions. During the 19th century in Britain, women radicals such as Susanna Wright, Matilda Rolfe, and Jane and Mary Ann Carlyle all stood trial, were found guilty and were imprisoned due to blasphemy. Women who rejected orthodox positions have long been attacked as heretics, made martyrs for the cause. The suffragettes weaponised their anger at being excluded from political representation, using both legal and illegal methods to convey their message to British society. The British state used every method in its power to control and reinforce the status quo, including force-feeding women in prison, censorship, and heavily policing protests. In the end, it was the outbreak of the Great War and a collective agreement to limit suffrage at war's end, which mollified the suffrage movement. What then to make of women who are heretics for the cause, women who rebel against the status quo? Fox's Book of Martyrs lays out 3 such women. Agrid Schnoff, widow of Smarden Parish, was several times summoned before the Catholic Pharisees, rejecting absolution, indulgence, transubstantiation and auricular confession. She was adjudged worthy to suffer death and endured martyrdom, with Anne Wright and Joan Soule, who were placed in similar circumstances and perished at the same time with equal resignation. Fox remarks that when the Protestant power first gained the ascendancy over Catholicism, superstition and some degree of force in the laws were necessary to enforce uniformity. The women were burnt at 2 stakes in one fire, singing hosannas to the glorified Saviour till the breath of life was extinct. Fox clearly eulogises the women and draws out the suffering, yet, unlike their more illustrious male martyrs, their lives are left without remark. Over the next 10 pages, Fox works through the life of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, digging into his life in exhaustive detail. The deaths of women are a footnote compared to his life. Indeed, on page 245, Fox gives this brief note on 2 other women burnt alongside Cranmer. Agnes Potton and Joan Trunchfield were both of Ipswich and suffered about the same time with Cranmer. When in prison together, Mrs. Trunchfield was less ardent and zealous than Mrs. Potton, but when at the stake, her hope in glory was brighter even than that of a fellow sufferer. That's it. 10 pages for the man burnt alongside them, and barely a line for them. This is a problem with trying to draw out anything from the historic record when it comes to women pushing back against the state. Fox lovingly details the lives of many of the men in his book, especially the religious Protestant luminaries who defied Queen Mary and the newly imposed Catholic Church, weaponising their deaths to spur on the entrenchment of anti-Catholic views once Elizabeth I became Queen. Over pages 249 and 250, Fox describes the life and death of Joan Waste. Blind from birth and unmarried, she was 22 and lived in the parish of Allhallows, Derby. Her father was a barber and also made ropes for a living, in which she assisted him. Refusing to communicate with those who maintained doctrines contrary to those she learned in the days of Edward I, she was called before Dr. Draycott, the Chancellor of Bishop Blaine, and Peter Finch, official of Derby. Sentence was passed against her, and August 1st, 1556, she was burnt at the stake. Fox describes her as the poor sightless object, and crafts the execution as a hallowed event which sanctified her. Joan is not dignified as woman alone, rather as a woman in opposition to the state, passed from father to judge to brother to stake. Stephen Brooke highlights that this struggle between the materiality of the body and its discursive meaning has been discussed and debated since the 1920s, with writers such as Dora Russell seeking to emancipate working-class women from social prosecution. As Nancy Hartstock outlines, a great deal has been discussed about the extent to which societies are structured around the domination and submission of women, which in turn intersects along race, class and gender. The shaping of heretics, witches and the unorthodox is in part caused by the distortion of men's domination over women. Hypatia's death in 415 AD sent shockwaves through the Roman Empire. For centuries, it had been assumed that philosophers were untouchable, free from the political turmoil that sporadically broke out. She was a respected teacher and thinker, the linchpin which held Alexandrian politics in check, and her death ushered in a swift collapse of the old order she helped build. Her body was torn to pieces, taken outside of the city, then cremated in an act that was perceived by her opponents of purifying the city of a vile element. In the millennia since her death, she has been transformed from Neoplatonic pagan friend to Christians, to the basis for the Christian St. Catherine of Alexandria, to an icon of anti-Catholic polemics through the 19th and 20th century, into representations of a feminist icon in the struggle for women's rights. Hypatia is a woman for all seasons, depending on how you wish to frame her and what cause you support. Her murder turned her into a cipher upon which others could project their own understanding onto her lives and beliefs. Much like Fox with his martyrs, John Toland used Hypatia as a cudgel against the Catholic Church in Hypatia, The History of a Lady, published in 1753. in which he embellished her life for his own ends. Mahsa Amini's death was handled in much the same way, with her being sanctified as a martyr for Iranian women's liberation. All the executions carried out due to the riots and protests were of men deemed politically expendable by the Iranian state, while all the women sentenced to death have either been exonerated or are still on death row. Women who fight back, resist, or simply exist in a manner deemed unacceptable to the state are a root cause for oppression of all citizens, not just the women. Hypatia and the female martyrs' transformation from women to icons served the purpose of galvanizing political causes while stripping back the very thing that made them human. We all live in Salem. The 2023 podcast, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, drew deeply from this well, seeking to reframe J.K. Rowling as a martyr to the feminist cause. Yet, as her X account continually shows, she has drifted further and further against core feminist values such as trans inclusion and social inclusion. Her witch trial is one of her own making, a deliberately sought after martyrdom to keep herself relevant and in the public eye. It is telling that women like Mahsa Amini sought no fame or fortune, their lives only known because of how they met their end. J.K. Rowling has deliberately sought out a cause through which she can use her fortune to attack a small minority. G. Bloomberg highlights that since the 17th century, the original Salem witch trials have become synonymous with paranoia and injustice, fueled by xenophobia, religious extremism, and long-brewing social tensions. The original witch hunt still fascinates us to this day. For J.K. Rowling and others to proclaim they are witches being persecuted for their beliefs shows how little they understand of the world they have created. The world gender critics, Muslim extremists and evangelicals seek to is one fueled by paranoia, control and the domination of women for the sake of a purified world. Social media has enabled the spinning and respinning of narrative threads much easier and quicker. Fox and Tolan, who had to spend time, money and political capital to get their works published and pass censors. Social media enables anyone with an opinion to post into the ether, making statements without a care about how true they are. The paranoia over women's safety, which has driven much of the gender-critical Christian and Muslim dialogue over the past 15 years, is a fountainhead from which many political careers have been made, and many latter-day witches have been figuratively and literally burnt. It is a paranoia which saw Ethel Rosenberg convicted alongside her husband during the height of the Red Scare, which in turn has kept her execution from being recognised as the tragedy it was. Indeed, the source of the leaks to the Soviet Union was Klaus Fuchs, who received a 14-year sentence in Britain for his espionage. Ethel was the secretary who potentially typed up her husband's note, and for that, she died. Ethel is not an easy victim to quantify. Indeed, there are plenty who view her as an absolute traitor to the United States to this day, who deserve to be cooked alive in the electric chair. It is shocking to claim she is a witch on par with Fox's martyrs, or those executed at Salem. Yet, if it is the law which causes people to be punished, then it is the law that needs examining. The Rosenberg trial clearly demonstrated that Ethel was guilty of a crime. Indeed, it would be remiss to state that she was innocent of the whole affair. Yet, compared to Fuchs and her husband, Ethel was a mere functionary. Like Hypatia, Ethel's life and death have been transformed into a cipher through which others can project their political views onto her actions. And just like the Salem witches, the paranoia and religious fervour of the period is eclipsed by the salacious nature of the story. All of this is to say that care is needed to be taken when we talk about the literal and figurative burning of witches in the public sphere. There is no one perfect narrative. J.K. Rowling is not Ethel Rosenberg, though the intent is there. Rowling has deliberately consorted with those who seek to bring down a liberal pluralism that benefits all women, all in the name of women's safety. She has funded court cases which have actively harmed women's rights, including Maya Forstater's case, which defined gender-critical beliefs as worthy of protection under the UK law, and the For Women Scotland decision, which undermined all women. Indeed, Rowling may have been a primary instigator in the reinstatement of punitive sex checks in all public facilities in the UK, alongside the instigation of red letters marking out any woman not deemed woman enough, and this is why interrogating the figurative and literal burning of witches is complex. Rowling's rally against trans women is not on par with every woman being abused and broken in Iran for refusing to wear a veil. Yet, what she has encouraged is a reveiling of the feminist mind in the UK and globally. History is replete with women sanctioned and punished for rebelling against putative crimes, yet those lessons appear to be going unheeded. Women's rights are not some narrow band that even narrow groups get to frame. They're pluralistic and as broad as every woman on the planet. To burn one woman is to burn us all, or, more prosaically, in a pluralistic society, when a woman is burned, it is a reflection of the failure of society to account for the intersections within it. At least that would be the hope. Yet, due to paranoia, social conditioning and abuses of power, there are plenty of women who would prefer to ensconce themselves in a privileged seat of power and feed on the scraps thrown from the table. Those women act as Aunt Lydia or Serena Joy, only realising too late that they have entered a trap from which there is no escaping. Women such as J.K. Rowling and Mother Teresa may prefer the sanctimony of their own convictions, rather than contemplating the actual harms they have caused. Women such as Joan Waste and Mahsa Amini lost their lives fighting for a cause they believed in, while women such as Ethel Rosenberg received such punitive punishments that ended their lives. The Serena Joys of this world realise too late that all the privilege in the world cannot save you from being burnt alive if the world declares you a witch and treats you as a rebel. Worse, all the faux co-option of rebellion that the likes of J.K. Rowling and Maya Fortisaster garb themselves in results in increased oppression of women, the restoring of literal and figurative veils, and the emboldening of those who want women to return to second-class citizenship. Catholic reactionary forces in the 1550s arose out of a desire to reassert conservative Catholic values in England, resulting in hundreds losing their lives to the terror. It failed to quell the Protestant hearts of people who yearned for social freedoms. The Taliban did not storm back in 2021 out of nowhere. They remained part of Afghan society, promising a more stable future than the corrupt American-led government. That promise was fulfilled in the enforcement of a straitjacket around all women, of veils being cast over the whole of society. The Red Scares in the 1950s America arose alongside the enforcement of gendered segregation and conservative values, with Ethel Rosenberg only one part of its many victims. Each has been driven by paranoia, fear, and a desperate desire for control. If we give in to those same forces, we will end up all living in Salem, seeing witches in everyone who dissents, figuratively burning anyone who disagrees with us. The burning of witches starts when pluralism and hope breaks down.